Good evening, listeners. Tonight, we journey once again into the shadows. Now, I don't usually get shaken easily, but this one, it stuck with me. It came from a man named Golf. Calm guy, rational, not the type to spook easily. But what he told me, it left me chilled. You see, Golf had an experience, one he never expected. It all started with a seemingly innocent visit, just an ordinary trip near an old temple. But what followed was anything but ordinary. This wasn't just a story about a haunted house or a restless spirit. It was about land, a plot of ground that should have stayed untouched, abandoned, forgotten. But someone didn't listen. Someone dared to disturb what was never meant to be disturbed, and they paid for it dearly. So wherever you are, curled up in bed, driving alone down a dark road, or just sitting in the quiet of your room, lean in, because what you're about to hear might just make you think twice the next time you pass by an empty lot that looks too quiet. This is the Forbidden Land. Let's begin. It started innocently enough. Golf had some errands that day and decided to make a quick stop at a familiar temple. Nothing unusual. He parked his car, got out, did what he needed to do, then came back ready to leave. He got in, started the engine, put it in gear. But the car didn't move. No resistance, no warning lights, just stuck. At first, he thought it was the handbrake, but it was down. Maybe the gear was off. No, everything looked fine. Still, the car refused to budge, like something invisible was holding it in place. So there he was, in the middle of the temple grounds, fidgeting with the controls, glancing around, hoping no one noticed. But this was a quiet area, and a car refusing to move was bound to catch attention. A few people passed by, some staring, others even asking, "Is everything okay?" And Golf, he's not the kind of guy who likes being the center of attention. You could feel his frustration building, embarrassment creeping in as he tried everything, turning the engine off and on, switching gears, even stepping out to look underneath, though he knew deep down nothing was wrong. Minutes dragged into half an hour. Sweat was beading on his forehead, not from heat, but from sheer confusion and humiliation. And then, just like that, the car moved. No struggle, no noise. It rolled forward like nothing had ever been wrong. Golf sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart thudding against his chest, not from relief, but from unease. Something about it wasn't right. It wasn't a mechanical issue. It wasn't a coincidence. It felt like something didn't want him to leave. But whatever it was, had finally let go. He drove away, face flushed, jaw tight. But deep down he knew that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. After that strange car incident, Golf couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You know when your gut tells you something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's how he felt. So, instead of heading straight home, he found himself driving, aimlessly, letting the roads decide. And before he knew it, the city gave way to quieter lanes, familiar ones he hadn't seen in years. He was back in the neighborhood of his childhood. The old streets hadn't changed much. Same narrow roads, the same crooked power lines swaying above. And then, there it was, a small, faded house tucked behind some overgrown hedges. The home of his uncle and aunt, not by blood, but by bond. They were kind people who looked after him while his parents worked. That place, it had once felt safe, warm. But even now, Golf could feel something else stirring. Not from the house itself, but from next door. He slowed the car down. That house, the neighbor's house, long abandoned, still covered in shadows, even in daylight. And just like that, memories started flooding in. Memories he thought were long gone. He remembered sneaking around as a kid, daring his friends to peek through the rusted gate. They'd heard whispers that the house was cursed, that no one stayed long, that strange things happened inside. And then, there was that one day. A boy from the neighborhood, no older than 10, had gone too close. No one knows what he saw, but he ran out screaming, tripped, and broke his arm so badly it twisted unnaturally. Golf had seen it happen. The image stuck with him, but the memory that gripped him the most was of her. An elderly woman, pale, thin, wearing a tattered sarong. She stood at the window of that house, just watching, quiet, still. And one day, She raised a hand, not to wave, but to beckon, slowly, finger curling in and out, like she was calling him in. He never told anyone. Not really. But that single gesture had haunted his dreams for years. And now, after all this time, just passing by that place made his skin crawl. It was like the past wasn't done with him. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't either. Years passed. Golf had moved on with life, career, relationships, the everyday rush that pulls us away from our past. But sometimes, the past has a way of calling us back. And when it does, it doesn't always knock gently. One day, on a whim, or maybe something deeper, Golf decided to visit that old neighborhood again. He wasn't even sure why. Nostalgia? A craving for familiar streets? Or maybe fate had drawn him back. In the back of his truck was a stray chicken he'd found wandering near his current home. He remembered an old friend from the neighborhood, someone who used to raise chickens. Thought it might be a nice gesture, you know? Reconnect, offer something small. So he drove, and once again, the road seemed to know the way before he did. They curved and narrowed until he found himself parking just a few houses down from it. The house, the cursed one, still standing, still rotting, like a wound that never healed. Golf tried not to look directly at it, but its presence was heavy, like fog in his lungs. He walked to his friend's house, chicken in hand, and knocked. They chatted briefly, pleasant enough, but something felt wrong. The air was too still. The sky had darkened unnaturally fast, and the silence around that old house next door, it was louder than any noise. As he was about to leave, standing in front of the truck, he felt it. A hand, no claws, ice-cold fingers gripped his shoulder. Not gently, not human. The pressure was sharp, like talons pushing through his shirt, digging into his skin. He froze, couldn't move, couldn't scream, but instinct kicked in. His legs stumbled forward, and he broke into a run, dropping the chicken, his keys, everything. He just ran. Didn't stop until he was in the truck, engine roaring, gravel flying beneath the tires. He didn't dare look back, but he knew something had reached out from that place. Something not seen, but felt, deep in the marrow. Later, shaken and pale, he told his friend about the experience. The man went quiet, then looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're lucky. You got away." Apparently, others hadn't been so fortunate. That house, no one stayed near it. No one bought the land. And those who lingered too long, something always happened. Golf hadn't just stumbled into the past. He'd stepped onto cursed ground, and something in that house had noticed. After that chilling encounter, Golf couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him. Or maybe, something had been awakened. He couldn't sleep. He'd hear faint whispers in the silence. Shadows would move when nothing else did. And that freezing grip on his shoulder? He could still feel it, even days later, like the memory had embedded itself in his skin. So he did what many would do in his place. He turned to the monks. Golf visited a well-respected temple and explained everything. His childhood memories, the recent visit, the claw-like hand. The monks listened, nodding, but when he mentioned the cursed house, their expressions changed. What had been a spiritual consultation quickly turned solemn. One monk, an elder, warned him gently, "Some places are beyond cleansing, but we'll try." And so, a few days later, Golf returned to that street. This time not alone, but with a small group of monks and curious villagers quietly trailing behind. Everyone was cautious, whispering prayers under their breath. The monks began the blessing ritual outside the old house, chanting steadily, sprinkling holy water, burning incense thick enough to choke the air. At first, it was quiet, too quiet. Then came the sound, tap, 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 footsteps, but not on the ground. They came from inside the house, from the staircase, clear as day, heels on wood, step by step, downward, but no one was inside. The monks froze mid-chant. One turned pale and dropped his water bowl. Another began chanting faster, louder, his voice cracking, almost desperate. Then, something else happened. The air changed, grew dense, heavy, and bitterly cold. A gust of wind whipped through the area, even though the air had been still moments before. Candles blew out. Dogs nearby began howling. One monk suddenly backed away, eyes wide with fear. And then, a scream, not loud, not human, a distant, echoing wail, like a woman mourning from deep within the walls. Low, guttural, filled with rage. It was enough. The villagers scattered. Even the monks, shaking, ended the ritual and urged Golf to leave immediately. Whatever spirit dwelled there did not want to be disturbed. It hadn't just revealed itself. It had warned them. Golf realized then, this wasn't just about bad energy or a restless ghost. This was something far older, far angrier. A presence tied to the land, vengeful and powerful. And it was only just beginning to show itself. After the failed ritual, Golf knew he couldn't rest until he understood. Why this land? Why this presence? So he began asking questions, quietly, carefully. Elders in the area, people who had lived there long enough to remember things most would rather forget. And that's when the pieces started to fall into place. Decades ago, before the house crumbled into ruin, before Golf was even born, the land was alive, but not in the way you'd hope. It was the site of illegal gambling dens, hidden behind walls that told no tales. Late at night, people came and went, men with secrets, women with debts, laughter that masked desperation. And at the center of it all was a woman. No one knew her real name anymore. They just called her May Noi, Little Mother. But don't let the name fool you. She was sharp, ruthless, always watching. Some said she was just a cunning businesswoman. Others whispered she was something else entirely. They claimed she practiced dark magic, the kind passed down in secret, bound with blood and bones and bitterness. That her luck at cards wasn't luck at all. And those who crossed her never seemed to stay lucky for long. But as with all things built on vice and fear, it didn't last. May Noi was betrayed by someone close. Some said it was a lover. Others, a rival who wanted her land. Whoever it was, they exposed her operations. Police raids followed. Her fortune vanished. Friends turned away. Enemies came knocking. And in the end, she was left with nothing. No money, no power, and worst of all, no one. She died in that house, alone. Some say she took her own life. Others believe the land took her, swallowed her rage, and sealed her pain into the very soil. But the thing is, she never left. Her spirit, twisted by betrayal, poisoned by hate, remained, guarding the only thing she had left, her land. Anyone who dared step on it, tamper with it, bless it, or, God forbid, buy it, they were trespassers in her eternal domain. Locals came to call it the Forbidden Land, and not out of superstition, but out of fear, because those who tried to claim it, they didn't just lose money or face strange accidents. They lost everything. And now, Golf had wandered too close. After learning the truth, Golf thought he could move on. But the land, she wasn't done with him. His nights became a battlefield. Every time he closed his eyes, he was pulled into her final moments. He saw it through her eyes. The cold silence of an empty house. The faces that once smiled at her, now turned away. The crushing weight of betrayal. The spiraling loss of everything she'd built. Taken, just like that. And the worst part, the loneliness. No voices, no footsteps, just the sound of her own sobs echoing through dark, empty halls. In his dreams, Golf didn't just see her pain, he felt it. Her heartbreak, her rage. It flooded into him like ice water through the veins. And every morning, he woke up gasping, covered in sweat or tears. He tried to avoid the land, swore never to return. But fate, cruel and precise, had other plans. One rainy night, Golf was driving near the village. He didn't even realize how close he was to that place. The curve in the road was sharp, visibility poor, and then, bang, a sudden swerve. Tires screeched. The world spun. His car flipped into a ditch. Locals found him hours later, unconscious but alive. Barely. But here's where it gets chilling. The emergency responders, when asked what they saw, spoke quietly, hesitant, as if unsure of what they'd witnessed. They said there was a woman standing by the wreck, dressed in white, her hair soaked through, clinging to her face. She wasn't helping. She wasn't calling for aid. She just stood there, watching Golf. And then, just like that, she disappeared. No trace, no footprints in the mud, nothing caught on camera. But those who saw her, they knew. They felt it deep down. It was her, May Noi. Her message was clear. He'd come too close. There would be no next time. She'd let him live. But only once. Listeners, Golf never returned to the land. And if he's smart, he never will. Listeners, some places, no matter how curious we are, no matter how strong the pull, they're better left untouched. Golf, he got out with his life. But the forbidden land, it's still there, quiet, waiting. A patch of earth that looks like any other by day, but by night, it watches, it remembers, it warns. Because what happened to her, what was done in secret, buried in betrayal, it didn't end with death. It became a curse, one that lives in the soil, in the wind, in the silence. So, if you ever find yourself passing through that village, and someone points to an empty lot and says, "That land there?" No one dares build on it. Keep walking. Don't ask. Don't look back. And remember, some stories aren't just stories. They're warnings. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.